the Hypogeum of Malta, the 110 Hz, frequency that alters the human brain. Somewhere beneath the sun-bleached streets of Paola, Malta, there is a door. It is modest, easy to walk past. But behind that door, a staircase descends into rock that has not seen natural daylight for 5,000 years. What lies below is not a basement. It is not a simple catacomb. It is one of the most astonishing structures ever built by human hands, and one of the least understood. This is the Hypogeum of Ħal Saflieni, and once you learn what it contains, what it does to the human brain, and what was found buried inside its deepest chambers, you will never think about the ancient world the same way again. Let's begin with what we know for certain. The Hypogeum was discovered entirely by accident in 1902. Workers drilling into the rock for a new housing development broke through the ceiling of an underground chamber. What they found stopped construction entirely. What was revealed over the following years of excavation was a 3-level underground complex, descending more than 11 meters into solid limestone bedrock. It covers roughly 500 square meters. It was not built with materials brought from elsewhere. The entire structure was carved directly out of the living rock by hand, using tools made of stone and bone and antler. No metal, no machinery, no cranes or pulleys that we know of. The oldest layers of the site date to around 3,600 BC. That makes it older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids of Giza, older than almost every famous ancient structure most people can name. And yet, what was carved inside this rock was not primitive. It was extraordinary. As you move through the Hypogeum's levels, the architecture changes in a way that is almost unsettling. The upper level looks relatively natural. Rough-hewn walls, cave-like passages. You might assume it was simply a larger excavation that happened to go deep. But then you descend to the second level, and everything shifts. Here, the builders created something that mirrors the temple architecture found above ground on the Maltese islands, but rendered entirely in stone below the earth. There are corbelled ceilings, smooth and precisely curved. There are doorways carved in the trilithon style, 2 upright stones supporting a horizontal lintel that mirror the above-ground megalithic temples of Gantija and Manajdra almost exactly. There are decorative niches, imitation windows, ornamental pillars, features that serve no structural purpose, features that were carved purely for aesthetic or symbolic effect. Someone wanted this underground space to feel like the temples above. Someone went to extraordinary effort to recreate that sacred architecture in a place where it would be experienced in total darkness. That tells us something important. This was not simply a place to store the dead. It was a place designed for a specific kind of experience. And that brings us to the feature that has fascinated researchers for decades: the oracle chamber. On the second level, there is a small oval-shaped niche cut into the wall. It is unassuming in appearance. You might walk past it without a second glance. But when a person with a deep, resonant voice speaks or chants into this niche, something happens that is genuinely difficult to describe until you experience it. The sound doesn't bounce back as a simple echo. Instead, it seems to dissolve into the walls. The limestone itself begins to vibrate. The sound spreads through the rock and re-emerges from every surface simultaneously, filling the chamber with a living, enveloping resonance that appears to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Acoustic researchers who have studied the site measured this effect carefully. They found that the oracle chamber generates a standing wave, a sustained, stable vibration, at approximately 110 to 112 Hz. This is a very specific frequency, and it is not a coincidence. In the 1990s and early 2000s, a series of studies began exploring what certain acoustic frequencies do to the human brain. Researchers at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, and later at institutions in Europe, began investigating what they called Archaeoacoustics, the study of sound in ancient spaces. What they found at the Hypogeum and at other prehistoric sites was striking. Exposure to sound frequencies around 110 Hz has been shown to alter brainwave activity in measurable ways. Specifically, it tends to shift the brain toward theta wave states, the kind of slow, rhythmic brainwave patterns associated with deep relaxation, light sleep, hypnagogic imagery, and certain meditative states. At the same time, activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain most associated with rational, analytical thinking and self-awareness, tends to decrease. Meanwhile, activity in the limbic system, which governs emotion, memory, and instinctive responses, tends to increase. In plain terms, 110 Hz can make a person feel less like a thinking, reasoning individual, and more like a feeling, sensing, emotionally open one. Now place yourself in the oracle chamber as it would have been experienced 5,000 years ago. You are underground. You cannot see your hand in front of your face. The only light may be the dim glow of an oil lamp. The air is cool and still. You cannot hear the wind or the sea or the sounds of daily life above. You are insulated from the world entirely. And then, from somewhere in the darkness, a voice begins to chant. Not in the direction you were expecting, not from a person standing in front of you, from the walls, from the floor, from the stone itself. The sound passes through your body, your chest vibrates, and your brain, without your permission or awareness, begins to shift its patterns of activity. This is what the builders of the Hypogeum created. Whether they fully understood the neuroscience, of course, they did not. But whether they had learned, through generations of experience, that this particular shape, carved to these particular dimensions, produced a particular effect on the people who entered it, that is a different question entirely. And the answer may very well be yes. Now let us talk about what was found in the deeper chambers, because this is where the story becomes more complicated. When excavations in the early 20th century reached the lower levels of the Hypogeum, archaeologists discovered something they were not prepared for: the remains of an enormous number of people. Estimates of the total count range from 7,000 to 11,000 individuals, buried across several centuries of use. This was clearly a site of significant and sustained ritual importance. But among those remains, excavators documented something that stood out. A number of the skulls recovered from the lower chambers were unusual. They were elongated, noticeably longer in the cranial vault than the average human skull. Some showed other atypical features: unusual brow ridges, differences in the positioning of certain bones. The Maltese archaeologist, Sir Temi Zamit, who led much of the early excavation work, documented these skulls. They were photographed. Some were placed on display at the National Museum of Archaeology in Valletta. And then, over time, they became harder to access. Today, researchers who have attempted to examine these skulls for modern analysis, DNA extraction, CT scanning, advanced morphological study, have found that access is tightly restricted. Authorities cite conservation concerns, which are legitimate for fragile prehistoric bone. But the absence of published modern scientific analysis has left a vacuum, and into that vacuum, speculation has rushed. Some researchers argue the elongated skulls represent natural variation within the prehistoric Maltese population. Others suggest artificial cranial deformation, a practice documented in many ancient cultures, where the skulls of infants were bound to produce a specific shape over time, usually as a mark of status or identity. This is the most mainstream archaeological interpretation. A smaller number of researchers have proposed the skulls belong to a genetically distinct population, possibly related to the seafaring peoples who built Malta's megalithic temples and then, around 2500 BC, seem to have vanished. The temple period ends abruptly. The culture that built the Hypogeum, that raised Gantija and Menasdra, disappears from the archaeological record. A new population arrives, and we still do not fully understand why. The question of who the Hypogeum builders actually were, biologically, culturally, genetically, remains open. Until comprehensive modern analysis of the skeletal remains is published, it will stay open. Let us also consider the deeper levels of the site because they add another layer to the mystery. Beneath the main ceremonial and burial areas, the third level of the Hypogeum contains features that suggest a very different purpose. There are large cisterns carved into the rock, basins capable of holding significant quantities of water. There are spaces that appear to have been used for dry food storage. There is, in essence, basic infrastructure for long-term habitation or survival underground. This has led some researchers to compare the Hypogeum to other ancient underground complexes, most notably Derinkuyu in Cappadocia, Turkey. Derinkuyu is an underground city capable of housing tens of thousands of people, with stables, food stores, water systems, and ventilation shafts. It was clearly designed as a refuge, a place where a population could descend and survive an extended crisis above ground. Malta's position in the Mediterranean made it vulnerable. Seismic activity, tsunamis, drought, and the violence of competing civilizations were all real threats across the millennia. Is it possible that the Hypogeum served, at least in part, as a refuge? A place where a group could withdraw from the surface, sustain themselves, and wait out whatever catastrophe had descended on the island? The infrastructure invites that possibility, but we should be careful not to overstate the case. What we have is suggestive, not conclusive. The Hypogeum does not stand alone. Across the ancient world, we find structures that combine extraordinary engineering with evidence of sophisticated knowledge that pushes against our assumptions about what prehistoric people were capable of. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a site dating to 9600 BC, we find elaborately carved pillars arranged in precise circles, built by people who were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. At Baalbek in Lebanon, we find foundation stones so massive, some weighing over 800 tons, that no modern crane could lift them. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, we find stone blocks machined to tolerances that seem almost impossible with the tools supposedly available at the time. These sites are separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. They do not obviously belong to the same tradition or civilization, and yet they share something, a level of precision, planning, and sophistication that our conventional narrative of human prehistory struggles to fully explain. The Hypogeum belongs to this group, not because it requires supernatural explanations, not because we need to invoke lost continents or ancient aliens, but because it demonstrates concretely that 5,000 years ago, on a small island in the middle of the Mediterranean, with tools of stone and bone, people understood something about sound, architecture, and human consciousness that we are only now beginning to measure and describe. They carved a room that vibrates at 110 hertz. They shaped stone until it resonated at the frequency that opens the human mind. And they did this so precisely that it still works today. The Hypogeum of Ħal Saflieni is currently a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It receives a limited number of visitors per day. Access is tightly controlled to protect the delicate underground environment. The moisture and CO2 from human breath can damage the ancient carvings and the fragile remains. If you ever have the chance to visit Malta, The experience of descending into this space is unlike anything else you can do in Europe. Even today, even with electric lighting and guided tours and the knowledge that you're perfectly safe, something happens when you go deep enough. The world above disappears, the temperature drops, the silence becomes a presence in itself. And somewhere below you, the stone continues to resonate at 110 hertz, just as it has for 5,000 years, waiting for a voice deep enough to wake it. The builders of the Hypogeum left us no written language, no name for their civilization, no explanation of what they believed or what they intended. What they left us is the structure itself, the carved stone, the shaped acoustics, the elongated skulls in the dark chambers below. They are asking us a question across 50 centuries of silence. We are only just beginning to learn how to listen. If this exploration raised questions for you, leave your thoughts below. And if you want to go deeper into the hidden layers of the ancient world, subscribe. There is much more still buried. Thank you for listening.